behalf, the subcommittee would probably respond positively. And so I finally did that. I made maybe it was a mistake, and I went back to the guy that was in charge of the endangered species program, and I just asked him point blank if what he would think about my doing that, and whether it would cause any big heartache for anybody. And he said, "Well, you shouldn't do it." But he didn't say I couldn't do it. so to make a long story short, I got the various groups of people, a couple of the state of Idaho, the state of Colorado where we were working. They sent a guy out to testify, and there were several other organizations, non-governmental organizations who were interested in wildlife that were willing to also support us. So we went marching down there. I had about 4 people that testified in my favor, and then I gave the spiel to the committee, and the committee chairman, they listened, and so he said, "Well," says, "if we do this," he says, "I guess I'd like to know how long it's going to take." And I don't know what to say. I said, "Well, it could take 10 years." 5 or 10 years, I said, probably.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he said, "Okay, we'll give it." So it was $300,000 we got, and that was our first big chunk of money. And that went on for the rest of the program, actually, one way or another. It was funny because we testified first before the House, the House of Representatives subcommittee, but then you have to deal with the Senate also, and then so both branches of the legislative government get involved in these money decisions. And it turned out, fortunately, that the guy that was head of the Senate committee was a senator in Idaho. And Idaho was where Morley Nelson lived, and he was, a really well-known falconer and raptor conservationist, and he knew all of the politicians in the state of Idaho, including this guy that was in charge of the Senate subcommittee. And so we got to him as well, and then it became a game because the way this money works, the way it's handled within the government agencies, or not agencies, but the politicians, is that they're always trading off. I mean, I'll do this for you if you do that for me,
Yes.
sort of thing, So,
Yeah.
so the two chairmen would kind of switch back and forth between who was going to have the primary responsibility for approving this authorization. So we ended up having to deal with both, and then of course eventually we moved to Idaho anyway. So we became an Idaho operation, and once we became an Idaho operation, the guy in the House side, who's from Illinois, said, "Look, I'm turning you over to the senator from here on. Since you're in Idaho now, he'll have to take care of you." So that's how it happened, and he did take care of it.
So, in all this time, were you able to practice any falconry at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So you were. I mean, it sounds like a full-time job that you had.
Yeah.
Sort of,
Yeah. No,
but you did manage to
I was
practice.
flying. I was flying. Actually, a peregrine most of the time.
Right.
And jurors. Later on, it was jurors mostly. But we even we kind of brought falconry into the breeding thing in a way, in that a lot of what turned out to be successful came out of falconry.
Right.
It came out of something to do with handling birds in falconry, and one of the things that we thought about doing and even tried on a small scale was holding back some birds that were being produced and flying them through the first year in falconry. And then what we wanted to do with those, but by that time we were having some birds coming back and nesting, or at least setting up territories. But often there would be just a single bird that would show up.
Right.
And so we were trying to figure out some way we could have a bird ready
Yeah. Okay.
to release as a mate.
Yes.
So we did that with about a dozen birds, and so I was training those birds, and one of my duties was to help train those, and so we got some pretty good birds out of it, but it didn't work out too well because well, of course, obviously some of the birds are going to get lost,
Yeah.
or
Right.
some accident is going to happen to them, or a guy gets so attached to his bird that he doesn't want to give it up, sort of thing. So
Absolutely.
it was never a very successful project, but it was something that we tried for a while. The best bird that I ever flew actually was a bird that was for that project. It was a peregrine tiercel. It was actually a wild-taken bird from Colorado, and it was flown. It was tame hacked in New Hampshire, and flown free for about a month, roughly. By free, I mean it was tame hacked. It's loose during the daytime, but you bring it in at night
Right,
to keep the owls from eating them. I mean that's the main reason. And that bird was an excellent falconry hawk. But unfortunately, I named him Perseus. I've forgotten now. Perseus was the son of some Greek gods. I've forgotten
Yes.
who offhand. But I called him Percy most of the time. But anyway, he about the third year, I had him out in New Mexico, and we were going to fly. We're going to hawk lesser prairie chickens. There were still quite a few around then. Now you can't find them anymore. Well, that's not true. They're starting to come back. But anyway, I had him out there, so I got a point and flushed up a small group of prairie chickens, and he went down immediately on one and hit it hard, but didn't bring it down, and it flew off naturally, and so he tail chased it off out of sight. And by this time we were using telemetry. I mean, it's one of the things that we also kind of pioneered was the use of telemetry for falconry. Bob Berry got into that, as a matter of fact. One of the early transmitters was named after him. And not transmitters, but receivers. Anyway, that's another story. It didn't come back, and so I got my equipment out, my transmitter out, and my receiver out, and I couldn't get any signal at first, so I said, well, I better start driving in the direction where he disappeared, because he probably was down on the bird out there a mile or two away. And as I drove out there, I started getting a very kind of funny signal. And again, to make a long story short, he had, as nearly as I can kind of piece it together, what I found the bird. As I was driving up and the signal was getting louder, I saw this telephone pole on fire, and I can, what in the, it happened. And then by the time I got up there, here's my bird sitting on the ground, practically burned to a crisp. It had been electrocuted.
Oh.
and all of its tail feathers were burned off, and the tips of its wings were singed, and a lot of his breast feathers had been burned, and he couldn't fly. And what happened apparently was that he was wearing a leg transmitter,
Oh, right.
and the transmitter apparently made a contact between a ground wire
Yeah, yeah.
and a hot wire, and it had sent an electric shock through the through the transmitter to him, and it hit his leg, and burned the transmitter to a crisp.